Last week, we talked about the fact that our world needs fixed. And sin is the reason it or we need to be fixed. And I told you that I had the answer for how we can fix this world. More accurately, I need to say God has the answer for how we can fix this world. There are 2 steps. Last week, we talked about step number 1. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. If we want to fix our broken world, we human beings need to start out by loving God with an unconditional agape love. And we are to love Him, not the things that we are trying to replace Him with. We are to love Him with every part of our being, our heart, our soul, and our mind. Today, I would like for us to look at step number 2. This step is found in several different passages, but we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 10, starting at verse 25 today. Luke 10, starting at verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" We know we need to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And we see added here strength in this particular passage. But notice who else Jesus says we need to love. Love your neighbor as yourself. Much of this we've already talked about. Love, what kind of love should we have for our neighbor? Well, we should have the same kind of love for our neighbor that we have for God, an agape love, a willing, unconditional love. Which leads to the next thing that we need to ask. Who is my neighbor? Who am I supposed to be showing this love to? Same question was asked of Jesus when he answered this question there, and he shared a parable to answer that question, who is my neighbor? Look in that same chapter, Luke chapter 10, starting at verse 30. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." We've probably all heard this sermon or this presented in sermons and lessons numerous times throughout the years. So we know all about the danger of the road that they were traveling on and all that kind of stuff. We know about the occupation of the priest and the Levite and what they did for a living. We also know about the relationship between the Samaritans and the Jews. Today, I would like for us to look at some lessons that I think we can learn from this parable that will help us love our neighbor. And the first lesson I believe we can learn is that our neighbor is not always who we expect it to be. As the coals from our barbecue burned down, our host passed out marshmallows and long roasting forks. Just then, 2 fire trucks roared by, sirens blaring, lights flashing. They stopped a couple of houses down the road. All 12 of us raced out the backyard down the street where we found the owners of the blazing house standing by helplessly. They glared at us with looks of disgust. Suddenly, we realized why. We were all still holding our roasting forks with marshmallows on them. Our neighbor is not always who we expect it to be. Think about the parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem. When he was attacked by robbers, he was beaten, and he was left to die. Who is the next character that we see come on the scene? A priest. We see a priest. This is a man of God. He is the one who performs the duties in the temple where they offer sacrifices to God, where they worship God. He is the one that you would expect to stop and help this man who he sees laying alongside the road. If you're like me, that's what you were expecting from a priest. But what does the priest do instead? He gives the scene plenty of space. He moves all the way over to the other side of the road and walks past the man. You would expect the priest to be this man's neighbor. Next character to come along is a Levite. Now, what exactly does a Levite do? Listen to what one commentator said. The peculiar duty of the priest was to offer sacrifices at the temple, to present incense, to conduct the morning and evening services of the temple. Levites were to render assistance to the priests in their services. In the journey of the Israelites through the wilderness, it was their duty to transport the various parts of the tabernacle and the sacred utensils. It was their duty to see that the tabernacle and the temple were kept clean, to prepare supplies for the sanctuary, such as oil, incense, wine, music of the temple service. So we see yet another person who is associated with the temple and with the worship of God. Yet he too walks past the man on the other side of the road. Another person that we would expect to stop and help this man walks by. Another person we would expect to be his neighbor. Next, we see a Samaritan walking down the road where the man has been attacked. Now, we know the relationship between the Jews and between the Samaritans. In John 4, Jesus is resting by a well in Samaria, and a woman approaches the well. A conversation ensues, and they talk with each other, and Jesus asks the woman to give him a drink. In verse 9, John 4, verse 9, we see her response. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Oh, I'm sorry, I did have that for you. There you go. So now we've had two men that you would expect to stop and help this injured man pass by on the other side of the road. And then we have a man that you would not expect to stop and help doing just that. He stopped and he went over and he helped this man who had been injured. I believe there's a lesson for us about who our neighbor is. It's not always the person we expect. Luke 6:32 through 34 says this, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full." Now, I know that particular passage is talking about loving your enemies, but I think it also applies to loving your neighbor. It's very easy to love that person who's always nice to you, or that person who always brings you cookies and desserts to eat, or that person that always has nice words to say about you. It's easy to love those people. But I believe Jesus wants us to learn to love our neighbor as ourselves. Who is our neighbor? It's not always the person we expect. God may be trying to tell you that your neighbor that you need to love is that mean person who lives next door to you, never speaks to you. Or maybe it's that person that every time you see them, all they have is bad things to say about you. Or maybe it's that person who doesn't look exactly like you do. If we want to fix our broken world, we need to love our neighbor. And that neighbor may not be who we expect it to be. I'm told that an angel came to Adam before he was created and said, "I have a proposition for you, Adam. We're going to create for you an individual like you, but a little different, a female." So Adam said, "Well, what will she be all about? What will she do?" The angel told Adam, "She'll take such good care of you, smell so sweet, love and respect you 24/7, and she will look so beautiful." To that Adam said, "Well, this sounds great, but what will it cost me?" The angel responded, "She's going to cost you an arm and a leg." Finally, Adam said, "What do you think I could get for a rib?" The next lesson that I believe we learn from Jesus' parable about loving our neighbor is that it will cost us to show love to our neighbors. Look back at our text, verses 33 through 35. "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Loving your neighbor may cost you monetarily, and it may cost you physically. Let's think about a couple of things that it cost this Samaritan when he stopped to help this man. To begin with, he took a risk by stopping. This man had obviously been attacked as he was traveling down this road. For all this Samaritan knew, the robbers may have still been there. They may have been waiting behind some rocks for somebody to come along and help this man so that they could attack that person, beat, and rob them as well. It does not tell us in this passage, but I believe this man did not even consider that as a possibility. I believe he saw an injured man who needed help and went to his aid just because that was the right thing to do. Didn't matter who the injured man was or how he was supposed to treat him or the risk that might be involved. I believe this Samaritan saw a man who was in need and he did the right thing. He showed us how to love your neighbor, even at possible risk to himself. But that's not all. It also cost this man monetarily to help the injured man. Look back to our scripture, verses 34 and 35. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. To begin with, we see him bandaging this man's wounds. It mentions that he pours on oil and wine, often used during biblical times in medicinal purposes. And that's the purpose here, was to soothe and sanitize the wound. After this, he took the man and he placed the man on his own donkey. Now, you know what that meant for him, don't you? I mean, he's going to have to walk now because the man's on his donkey. He took him to an inn and he stayed with the man through the night, looking after him. Next morning, he got up to leave. He went to the innkeeper. He enlisted the help of the innkeeper to watch after the man while he was gone. Gave him some money to help with the expenses and told him, if it cost you any more than that, when I come back through, I'll reimburse you for what you spent. It obviously cost this man to care for this complete and total stranger. Barnes, in his commentary, explains verse 34 this way. These were often used in, talking about the oil and wine, were often used in medicine to heal wounds. Probably they were mingled together and had a highly sanative quality. How strikingly is his conduct contrasted with the priest and Levite. And how particularly as well as beautifully by this does our Savior show that we ought to do to those who are in circumstances of need. He does not merely say in general that he showed him kindness, but he told how it was done. He stopped, came where he was, pitied him, bound up his wounds, set him on his own beast, conducted him to a tavern, passed the night with him, and then secured the kind attendance of the landlord, promising him to pay him for his trouble, and all this without desiring or expecting anything in reward. Lesson 2. It may cost us to love our neighbor, but that shouldn't be a problem for us. In the Holman Christian Standard Bible, 1 John 3, 17 and 18 says this. If anyone has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, but closes his eyes to his need, how can God's love reside in him? Little children, we must not love with word or speech, but with truth and action. Loving our neighbor may cost us. The last thing I would like to point out from this passage is that this love thy neighbor thing, it's not a request, but a command. Neil Martin, a member of the British Parliament, was once giving a group of his constituents a guided tour of the Houses of Parliament. During the course of the visit, the group happened to meet Lord Hailsham, then Lord Chancellor, and he was wearing all the regalia of his office. Hailsham recognized Martin among the group, and he cried out, "Kneel!" Not daring to question or disobey the command, the entire band of visitors knelt immediately. Jesus is not making a request of us. He is giving us a command. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. But after the parable that illustrates who our neighbor is, Jesus has one more command for us. Go and do likewise. Not a request, but a command. 1 John 2, 3 through 6 says, "We know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, 'I know him,' but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did." Jesus used this parable to teach his followers the question that we've got to ask ourselves is, have we learned from this parable? Do we show this same kindness to all, to friend or to foe? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. 2 steps to fix our broken world. Love God and love your neighbor. Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan has some great lessons for us to learn from, if we will just learn them. Our neighbor may not be the person that we expect it to be. It may be that person that we don't like, or that person that looks different than we do. It may cost us something to love our neighbor. If nothing else, it's going to cost us our time to show that person our love. And then Jesus finished the parable with the words, "Go and do likewise." Not a request, but a command. Jesus expects us to love our neighbor. John Darley and Daniel Batson are 2 Princeton University psychologists. Some years ago, they decided to conduct a study inspired by the story of the Good Samaritan. They conducted the study at Princeton Theological Seminary. They met with a group of seminarians, and they asked each one to prepare a short talk on a given theme. Then they would walk individually to a nearby building to present it. Along the way to the presentation, each student would run into a man who was planted in an alley. He would be lying there moaning and groaning in pain. The question was, who would stop and help the man? Darley and Batson asked half the seminarians to give a talk on the opportunity or ministry opportunities available for students after graduation. The other half was asked to prepare a short devotional on the story of the Good Samaritan. Also, the researchers wanted to find out if being in a hurry made a difference to the students. So they told 1/3 of the group that they had plenty of time to get to the building where they needed to make their presentation so they could take their time. Another third was told that they would have just enough time to make it to the building if they left immediately to get there. And the last third was told that they were already late. They'd better hurry up and get over to the other building immediately. In other words, the experimenters put 1/3 of their subjects in a low hurry mode, 1/3 of their subjects in an intermediate hurry mode, and a third group in a high priority mode. So which ones offered to help the man in pain? Turned out that it made no significant difference whether they were talking on ministry opportunities or the Good Samaritan. That didn't really make that much of a difference. What did make a difference was how much of a hurry they were in. Of the low hurry subjects, 63% offered help. Of the intermediate hurry subjects, 45% offered help. Of the high hurry students, only 10% offered help. Don't let the pressures of the world keep you from following God's commands to love your neighbor as yourself. We're going to